China Watch Radio is brought to you in part by Sushi Market Sprouts on 7th in Santa Cruz and Kaito in the Capitola Mall Food Court. Treat yourself to the finest Japanese cuisine you'll find anywhere with fresh sushi to go and delicious ramen dinners. Sushi Market Sprouts and Kaito. Yum!
Tonji-man, Tonji, Waying Haran. Yes, comrades, welcome good people to the October 6th edition of China Watch Radio.
Michael Olson is on assignment. That means he's on vacation.
Yes. Today we're discussing, has China already invaded the United States? Not as far-fetched as it might sound. The CCP is working diplomatically, economically, militarily to create protection for her flanks in the Pacific and establishment of a foundation for power projection, which eclipses the territorial boundaries of Taiwan and further erodes and encroaches on Japan, South Korea, and the ever-increasing sphere of operations throughout the regions. Listeners will recall on China Watch Radio Team, we've reported that China is building islands outside of man-made islands on the outskirts of the Philippines, has heavy influence across the Solomon Islands, Sri Lanka, and other countries. The ultimate partnership, the unlimited partnership with Russia, threats against Taiwan, influence into the Arctic, Confucius Institutes and our institutions of higher learning, and the elite capture of influential people across the U.S. But these are a few examples of the hand reaching from across the ocean. With Xi Jinping arising from 10 days of seclusion without a COVID mask, is he the new emperor of China ready to be coronated on the 20th People's Congress meeting, commencing in 10 days? Meaning with an unprecedented third term in power, is China now on a power foundation to answer the question, has China already invaded the United States? I'm David Welch, a.k.a. Nordic Dave. Michael Olson is away this week on assignment, and in the studio we've got Bill Graff. Bill, how you doing?
I'm doing fine. I'm a little busy these days, but we're keeping it together.
Oh, that's amazing. You're a blur. I'm watching you. Johnny up in the woods. Johnny, how are you doing?
Fantastic, David. It's great to be here with you guys.
Super. And we've got Susan Simon on the boards. Thank you, Susan, for holding down the fort for us.
Anytime.
Yeah, thank you so much. You do such a great job.
Boy, what a lineup today of stories.
It's
a fascinating. Yeah, it is really unbelievable.
Well, let's just get right into it because it's actually, I was a little bit dumbstruck looking at the headlines and what we had curated for the audience. This one I found absolutely stunning. Chinese police forces working in the USA.
Surveillance
and harassment and attachment to their citizens. So a whistleblower report has indicated that China is conducting policing operations in the U.S., and China is performing surveillance on Chinese citizens, as well as Canada, by the way. They've got an operation set up in Ontario. I have to ask the
rhetorical question that you asked. We used to ask this like when you get pulled over for a speeding ticket by a Watsonville cop, but you're in Capitola. Mm-hmm. Do you have jurisdiction? Do these guys have jurisdiction in our country?
Well, they don't formally have any jurisdiction, but they're operating as if they do. Which I found absolutely fascinating. And if you think about, the classic fifth column operation back in the Second World War, people talk about Germany inside of Norway as the classic example of a fifth column operation, having forces inside the country to control and manipulate your opponents and then cause chaos and confusion. And I'm trying to figure out how that's actually different than this, or are they the same?
Do we have jurisdiction over them? I mean, can our FBI go, wait a minute, you can't act like cops here?
I think in some cases, in many cases, yes. However, some of these people have diplomatic immunity as well. So we can just ask them to leave. We can't really come in and ask them to, we actually can't put them in our jails.
Escort them to the border.
We can escort them to the border with chances of retaliation on the other side. So there's an human rights organization group called Safeguard Defenders, has discovered these clandestine operations operating out of Toronto in New York City by the Chinese. And in a way, it actually just kind of makes a mockery of sovereignty of both of our countries. Also, it's probably worth remembering that why New York? And that New York, of course, is where the Uyghurs are in exile. That's where the Shen Yun organization is, right? Who has the anti-CCP, ballets and stage performances. It's also where people testify at UN hearings on civil rights. So what a great place to be if you want to, be able to capture somebody and put the arm on them and say, oh, by the way, I understand you're going to talk this afternoon at the UN. I'm going to remind you about your brother and sister and your mother who is still under our control. And, let me know if you'd like to have a conversation later, or would you like to have a pass home to make sure that they're okay?
Yeah.
Right, exactly. Our audience, for our audience's sake, David and I were kind of going to tag team this story because there was a couple different articles all mentioning it, and it's the scale of it needs to be understood. Now, I believe this is actually something happening in roughly 30 countries, the majority of them in Europe. So it's hardly just the four stations in the U.S. and Canada.
Yep.
The Safeguard Defenders grew out of an organization called China Action. Mm-hmm. They were working with human rights lawyers and other human rights defenders in China from 2009 to 2016. Very interesting organization. When we get a moment to breathe after this upcoming party congress on the 16th, perhaps we'll see if we can get some of the folks involved with it on the air with us.
Yep.
But this, they published an expose, a research paper called 110 Overseas Chinese Transnational Policing Gone Wild. 110 is like the Chinese 911. It's the equivalent, just to understand what the meaning of that is. And they're saying that there's been roundabouts 230,000 Chinese expats who have quote unquote voluntarily gone back to the mainland to face charges. I don't know of a lot of folks who voluntarily go to face charges. I don't know if you guys do. So obviously there's some coercion going on, and I think David did a good job of giving you an analogy of the sorts of things that are going on.
We know where your mom lives.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Well, what's interesting, too, is that this is really what's, popped to the surface, right? I know you mentioned a number of other countries, but Budapest, Prague, Madrid, Frankfurt, Amsterdam, Paris, London, Athens, Toronto, New York. This is a very pervasive operation. And this is where the groundhog has stuck his head above the soil. Right, it's probably significantly more pervasive than just these particular cities, and they probably operate on a national basis out of some of these centers as well. Now, I remember during the Cold War, and even after the Cold War, in fact, I remember during the second George Bush administration, there was a spy facility from the Russians that was established outside of Virginia, where they were doing this type of operation. They were apprehending people who were Russian citizens or under that Russian sphere of influence.
I remember that too.
Yeah, and we wound up, I think confiscating that property and kicking everybody out. It's interesting here that we haven't seen that type of rebuttal yet. And of course, one's imagination could soar for a little bit and think about the elite capture, or how deep are the Chinese fingers actually, kind of inside of our, the infrastructure of our governance of our country, to be able to have a headline like this without, any comment from the Biden administration.
Well, we also have to look at what is meant by the headline, China has police stations in the U.S. Police stations is in quotes. It's not like there are police cars, sirens going, and police cars with Beijing police driving around New York City, busting people for speeding tickets. These police stations are sort of de facto police stations. They're saying that's what they really are, because they're using that term really to try to get people to pay attention to what's going on here. Because the whistleblowers are. It
is a policing activity over the First Amendment rights of people in this country.
That's kind of why I asked the question, when you first started this, is, do they actually, can they actually operate as de facto police stations in the United States? And are they subject to in other words, can we say you can't do this?
Yeah, well, I think
I think it's a big question, because
it is.
If they can do it, that's really scary. And if they can't do it, how come we're not stopping them from doing it?
Well, Billy, let's say you and I were, we were police officers and we were contacted by somebody who had a lot of connections. Maybe they had connections in, I don't know, the CIA or something like that. And they said, we want to send you over to Myanmar and have you guys keep an eye on somebody. And if they start releasing certain information, then we want you to give them some really strong encouragement to come back to the United States. I think that would be more the equivalent of what's going on here. I don't know if these folks are necessarily, they're not necessarily carrying a badge.
No, but they're policing a policy, and it is a true.
And they're obviously making themselves known to the people they're quote unquote policing.
We're here and we're watching you, so
Yeah.
there's a deterrent component to.
it's
230,000 people being repatriated. That's
that's a lot.
That's enormous. That is a large scale operation.
Well, I think we have to remember in Santa Cruz County only has 321,000
exactly.
people.
It'd be like taking the entire population of Santa Cruz County and moving them
right.
home.
Yeah.
Yeah, the U.S. has a prison population of something like 1.2 million, and that's accrued. Half the folks in there have sentences that are 10, 20 years. It's an enormous number of folks to be sending home.
And I'd remind people, when you hear the word, to Billy's point I was making earlier, which I liked, when you hear the word policing, you think of our local police department, enforcing speeding tickets and shoplifters and all the way up to major and significant crimes. But policing is really holding a standard. It's maintaining a certain edge in a community or society that you're not going to cross. And so at that point, they are a traditional police force in that they're actually governing the behavior of their people. It's just inside of our borders, not inside of theirs.
Which is frightening to me.
Yeah.
And the governing isn't, you guys are conducting any sort of illegal activity. The governing is, we don't like what you're saying about our government.
Right. Exactly.
Yes.
Which is a pretty major distinction, I think. Now, they have some sort of justification that it has to do with the whole sort of business corruption thing. But that it really seems sort of transparent to me that that's not.
Yeah, it's pretty thin.
That's not what's really going on here.
Yeah, no, it's pretty thin. If in this country we have the First Amendment, we have a freedom of speech. In fact, you have a freedom of speech even if you're not a citizen of this country, even if you're a visitor or a tourist. You have you still have that first constitutional right. And here we've got a foreign power who's an adversary of ours actually having boots on the ground, enforcing their view.
You can't say this.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's not
Impeding the
really
First
freedom
Amendment.
of speech if you've got a foreign group of people coming to your community and saying to
Yes.
foreign nationals in your foreign community.
Exactly.
You can't say that.
Yeah, well said, Billy, and that's right where the rubber should hit the road in a functioning society. We should be saying, actually, by the way, we protect those rights here.
Right.
Exactly. We are who we are, right? And we need to.
Of course, we have had some instances in our country where, for instance, when the WTO went to, I think it was Seattle a number of years ago, we erected a cyclone fence and we said, this is where you can have your free speech zone.
Yeah.
And I loudly said at the time, wrong.
Yeah.
The entire United States of America is a free speech zone unless you're in a crowded theater and you yell fire.
Yeah, exactly. There's some basic curbs, but that's about it, right? So if, to be able to, and I think most people cherish probably of all the amendments, probably that one the most in this country,
Sure.
right? It's probably the most celebrated around the world, along with right of assembly. Right? We know the whole Bill of Rights. To quote Joe Biden, you know the thing. So
It's true, though.
Yeah.
We do know the thing.
yeah, no, and it's for us to have, to not push back on this and not see just a loud rebuttal out of our government. Maybe one's coming. I'm going to be watching for it.
Well, another thing that I see here, part of this story for me at least, is how we affect change. So there's an organization called the Safeguard Defenders, and they're made up of some rather interesting individuals who are very concerned about human rights, etc. They're receiving funding, and I don't know from who, It could be all small donations. I don't really know. It could be George Soros. God, I hope not. Um, but you have these independent, non-governmental organizations who are in a position to actually conduct meaningful research.
Yes.
And yes, they usually do have some sort of an agenda. It might be a really good agenda. It might not. And then they publish these sort of papers, which are picked up by some of the mainstream news media and get turned into a story.
Yeah.
And the headlines get a little bit more tantalizing, and the articles themselves are a little bit more emotive than the initial report, which was more factual. But the intention is to create some sort of ground wave of public outcry, such that we would then have an influence over our representatives.
Yeah.
Fingers crossed on that.
To your point, Jonty, where are we going to hold the line?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. I think this is an area where, the public sentiment with regards to the U.S. relationship with China has had a dramatic turn over the last 10 years. All of the politicians now have realized that if they've got some sweetheart deals going on with Chinese businesses, they're not going to be in office. And Joe Biden's come in taking a hard line on China left and right because he knows that even his base is very much upset about the way that the relationship has been so askewed, so one-sided for so long. So now there's these inroads. So we get a report like this. We need to sort of spread this around, and folks need to know about this so that it turns into an issue that our representatives realize is sensitive. If I was running for office in New York, in any sort of position, a governor or something like that, to come forward and say, hey, look, there's a de facto Chinese police station operating here. If you bring me into office, I'm going to do something about it. My predecessor turned a blind eye to this. I'm not going to.
Well, it's interesting when you see security forces at work. I've seen some that are really impressive. So I was over the hill in big tech companies. I actually knew, in two of those companies, I knew the head of security. And, they're kind of in the shadows. You don't know who they are. You don't see them. They operate, in the background, keeping everything safe. And when you meet these people and you see them work, they're incredibly intimidating. When they confront
that's who
somebody,
you want in a private company that's protecting the company secrets and all that. You want guys that walk around and look like they'll rip your head off if you do it wrong.
Yeah, and that's a really important, from a psychological standpoint, a really important component of somebody who's going to be, an enforcer or in security. But I mention that because, that can be pivoted to nefarious as well.
Oh, for
right?
sure.
And so when we say police, it's like these people aren't walking around with, black and white squad cars with a pump action Remington on the dash and, maybe a exposed sidearm and a badge. But they have incredible intimidation tactics. They understand the psychology of how to push people back and how to drive fear into people. And they can do that at one level just by with a certain amount of presence. But then there's this knowing that there's even a larger force behind them and people with tentacles to reach back to friends and relatives at some point, right?
And if you've ever dealt with a situation like that, like when I was in high school, we had these guys they called parapros. And they walked around the high school campus, and any gang guys that looked like they were going to start a fight or something, these boys would show up, and you're right about the intimidation factor. They got the bluff in early on the bad kids, and they would never try to take these guys on because they were just tougher than tough.
Well, it's amazing when you see something like that, though, isn't it, Billy?
It really is amazing to watch.
Yeah, just when people really understand the psychology of it, they've got the psyche to lean into it.
Well, it's like walking into a room full of Marines.
Yeah.
It's pretty much the same thing.
Yeah.
You're not going to mess with this group.
Yeah.
Speaking of a room full of Marines, Billy, tell me about these ferries being used.
This is the most.
Drills.
We think of invasion groups as like warships and drones and cruise missiles and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. Big navies. Well, guess what? The Chinese have figured out another way to launch an attack. Here's what it is. They're going to put arms on ferries.
Not the ones with wings. You're talking about the boats.
No, I'm talking about the boats that move cars around, from,
like
point A to-
Sausalito Ferry up to San Francisco Bay Area.
Can you imagine getting on a ferry in Sausalito, right?
Yeah.
And on the same ferry are air-to-air missile launchers.
Wow.
Well, guess what? The Chinese have done it. The military held a major exercise to prove how the People's Liberation Army's Navy could use large civilian ferries to launch a massive amphibious invasion of Taiwan.
Fascinating.
Well, this is more than fascinating for me because remember, like we were talking about early on in the program, we're talking about all these man-made islands that are, part of the Chinese plan to gain a foothold in that area. Well, the landing craft, the amphibious landing craft, can go to a Chinese beach in one of these islands near the Taiwan Strait and get there in a fast hurry because most people don't realize that ferries actually are fairly overpowered and can move pretty quickly because that's what they're designed to do is move lots of cars and people from point A to point B pretty quickly.
When I saw that story, I thought, this is so Captain Obvious. I thought,
absolutely.
This is a genius, actually.
It actually is.
Yeah.
And what I thought about initially when I read this story was, remember Dunkirk?
Yes.
And we got...
Same thing came to mind, yeah. They confiscate all the civilian craft, yeah.
Yeah. And I grew up around ferries in the Sacramento Delta, and the Sacramento Delta is made up of a whole bunch of islands, and there are various islands that you can only get to if you go on a bridge or a ferry.
Sure.
And, I remember the Ryer Island Ferry when I was a kid. We used to go across it all the time because my dad would work on one of the islands out there.
Yeah.
And, it would take it was on a cable, and it took 15 minutes to go from one side to the other. These ferries, I'm talking about that the Chinese are using, can go 40 knots.
Yeah.
They're really fast.
They can haul.
And
the other thing, they were talking about the carrying capacity of these things is something like 1.6 kilometers of contiguous parking space, essentially.
They're huge.
So we've covered in the past all of these fishing boats, these heavily armored, extremely fast fishing boats that are dual use and used for all sorts of intimidation in the South China Sea. But what we're talking about here is a ferry that is offloading amphibious landing craft. So a lot of the calculations with Taiwan have to do with X number of troops in the initial invasion, and then they'd have to take a port in order to land more troops.
Well,
what
the other
ferries
thing
are allowing the CCP to do is to offload in the ocean a landing craft that can then attack the beaches.
Well, some of these ferries also have helipads where they can actually hold 2 or 3 helicopters.
No, these are enormous, and they've got tremendous lift capacity and speed performance and towing capacity also. I mean, I've seen ferries pull barges as well.
Well, the satellite picture that came with this article is just amazing. It shows, I don't know how big this ferry is because it's coming down, the picture's from a satellite, but it looks like a little aircraft carrier. It's huge. And like you said, they can offload other amphibious vehicles right off the end of the ferry.
And fast. It's amazing because you can stage an invasion fleet right underneath your nose.
Well, it does make you we've talked in earlier programs about this, Jonty, the fact that the way warfare is conducted in the future will be vastly different than what we conceive of warfare now.
Well, it already is, and I should say this just before we go to the break. It's a little bit hilarious. I was thinking about this earlier today, that you would actually be in a war with another country while at the same time you're still selling them natural gas.
Yeah, exactly.
That's pretty weird. Yeah, we'll still sell you the natural gas.
Or if we went to war with China, we're still buying all this stuff from China.
Exactly.
It'd be weird.
Yeah, and selling our strategic oil reserve. I just remind the audience to follow along on ChinaWatchRadio.com and sign up for the new No Spam newsletter. And we've got a great second half hour coming up right after the break on China Watch Radio.
Satisfy your hunger with a fresh, prepared, twice-daily grab-and-go sushi you'll find waiting for you at Sushi Market Sprouts, 2 blocks from the beach at 300 7th Avenue in Santa Cruz. Fresh, delicious, and oh so good.
Hello, I'm Junko, and I look forward to serving you at the Sushi Market Sprouts.
Are you thinking of selling your house and don't want to pay 5 to 6% in commissions? I'm David Bartels with Everhome Realty, and I'm like you. I don't believe in percentage-based commissions either, and that's why we offer full-service representation, great results, and 5-star service for a very low flat fee. Last year, I was ranked 14th in California homes sold, and I can sell yours for top dollar, too. To see how much you can save, go to everhomerealty.com, EVERHOME, realty.com.
Bill Graff here, talking with Alexander Hagen from Etheric Networks. Alex, tell me about your crew.
We have about 45 staff here in the Bay Area, double E and RF engineering. I have some top networking guys. We get support from our vendors. We've been doing this for 20 years. We consider ourselves, with all due modesty, very strong on the technical side of the business. And we also like what we do, just like I know you like what you do. We want our customers to be happy all the time. And so it depresses us if our customers are unhappy. You remember back in the big storms, we worked day and night to make sure that service kept running.
How can folks get a hold of Etheric?
I would suggest sending a mail to sales@etheric.net and mentioning the KSCO special. We'll give them 10% off on their first year on install, on equipment, on service. But we also have a website, and just look up Etheric Networks, and that has information with our phone number, our sales contact information, as well as direct interactivity with the website.
Hi, this is Hema with The Holistic Mystic. I'm so excited to tell you about a show that I have on Fridays from 7 to 8 p.m. here on KSCO. Are you feeling stuck and don't know what to do? You need some help to get unstuck so that you can feel free and happy? Let's talk about it all, from spirituality to wellness to intimacy. It's all connected. Keep listening for uplifting mystical readings that will give you some insights into how you can live your best life. Join me, Hema, Holistic Mystic, Fridays at 7 p.m.
Attention KSCO listeners, this is Rosemary Chalmers, Program Director. We recently applied to the FCC, our governing body, to extend a temporary authorization to broadcast at night on 1,000 watts. This has been denied, and as such, all KSCO programs after dark and until sunrise will be heard on our sister station, AM 1340, KOMY. We apologize and will revert to normal operations on KSCO as soon as possible.
At Batteries Plus, we power family road trips. We power bedtime stories. We do more than replace batteries and fix phones and tablets. We help our neighbors power their lives. Visit us in-store, curbside, and at batteriesplus.com.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the second half hour of China Watch Radio. If you missed the first half hour, you missed a lot. Coming up now in the second break is where are we? Jaunty. I lost where I got my list.
If all else fails, just ask me, and I'll start.
I think you had an O. You had an O for Olson, I think, on the
I have
China
to
strategy.
laugh. Yeah,
so I'm looking
totally
for Michael.
Yeah. I assigned an article to Michael Olson, and since he's not here, that's going to be a bit of a problem. It's either his fault or it's mine.
It's only about China and the Arctic Circle. No problem.
Yeah, published by Rand.
Yeah, exactly.
So if anybody in our audience wants to go ahead and take a look at that article,
it's pretty scary, actually, to tell you the truth. I read it. It's pretty scary.
It's on ChinaWatchRadio.com. Now, I was actually I looked at two articles for the second half. One was in The Guardian, and it had the title, "Think Putin is a Global Threat, Then We Need to Talk About Xi Jinping." And I found it so sort of pedantic and pedestrian that I really didn't think that anybody was going to get a lot out of it. I mean, if it's news to you guys that Xi Jinping is an authoritarian leader, has been consolidating power, etc., then
wait, are you serious?
You're obviously new to the show, right? If that's the case, and you're welcome to go and take a look at that article. It has some interesting, cute stuff. Stuff about how Xi's in the sort of staged event goes for a walk with his mom, who's in her 90s, and shows that he has got this wonderful soft side and all that. But other than that, it's all kind of stuff that we already know about.
Yeah, tell the Uyghurs he's got a soft side.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. The other thing that I found very interesting was there's another piece by Peter Zeihan, a geopolitical analyst who I've found very interesting for many years now. He's made a few predictions that ended up coming quite true. For instance, he was saying that we are very soon going to see the end of globalization. I think if anybody's paying attention to what's going on, it wasn't the worst prediction. So I listened to a piece of his. You can find it. It's actually an 8-minute long YouTube video, and you'll find it if you go to ChinaWatchRadio.com.
The fascinating part of it, though, is the title, is what it's called. There's no turning back now. The end of China has begun, and they know it. Right.
Well, he talks about two significant aspects that are bringing about this, what he sees as the imminent collapse of the current Chinese economy and or system. The first is demographics, and we've talked about it an awful lot, so I don't want to spend too much time on that, but for those who don't know, the entire developed world is experiencing a demographic decline. That's something that we don't really have a lot of experience with in the last several hundred years, at least since the Black Death, right, in the 12 and 1300s. So it's a little bit difficult to know what's going to happen. China is one of the worst off countries when it comes to this. As Peter Zeihan put it, China is going to lose 2 Americas worth of population in the next 30 years.
Yeah.
Well, we've reported on this in the past, and it's, there isn't exactly a line of people trying to immigrate into China to make up the gap like there is in the United States.
Well, it's 38 million people in the United States?
Yeah.
Double that, and that's what China expects to lose in population. That's a lot of people.
It's stunning. And they're going to have a much worse inverted pyramid than we did, right, from the baby boomers in terms of the amount of young people being able to support the elderly.
It doesn't even compare. He was talking about you need 2.1 births per woman to maintain your population. He's talking about that births per woman number being below 0.7. That's 0.7 in Chinese metropolitan centers. And then, of course, one has to realize that this drop-off in population is in people younger than 40. So it's going to be very strange. So China is a country that, as Peter mentions in his piece, is the third most internationally integrated after Germany and South Korea. So China imports raw materials and imports technology, and then exports finished goods. Something that I found really interesting here was that Peter sort of focuses in on microchips. Of course, we've suddenly come to realize after the supply chain shock of the coronavirus lockdowns that the economies of the world today are heavily dependent on semiconductor technology in the way that the economies of the 30s and 40s were dependent on oil. And so this is a crucial part of our contemporary supply chains. Now, everyone, there's this tendency to say, well, China's just going to build all these things. China actually doesn't have the easiest time making high-end microchips. They struggle with mid-end microchips, and they aren't able to make their own, at this point, to make their own equipment to build the low-end microchips.
Well, to highlight that, how difficult that is, currently Intel is backwards in, the size of the chip that they can make. So their competitors can actually make a smaller submicron chip than they can. And that's really put Intel at a disadvantage in trying to catch up. But here's a case where you've got economic and technological parity and a lot of know-how inside of the United States. And here you've got one of the leading chip vendors on the planet here who can't make it to that level, let alone somebody like China trying to clone and copy its way up, to that level of achievement.
Right. Peter made such extraordinary claims in this that I had to go and find a second source to see what somebody else was saying. But let me just read a quote here real quick. He says, the Dutch, the Danes, the Brits, the Japanese, the Koreans, and the Taiwanese, along with the Americans, saying that never again can the Chinese access high-end chips at all. And then debating what mid-end chips will allow them to have access to, and also debating whether or not all of these various countries are going to continue selling the manufacturing equipment to make the low-end chips. So I don't know, like, hold on a second. Are we looking at a situation where we have a sort of borderline embargo on microchips and microchip manufacturing equipment? So I took a look at an article in the Asia Times, and they sort of reaffirmed some of that. But what they also suggested was that because the U.S. is leading this kind of massive curtailment in what we're going to allow China to have with regards to microchip manufacturing, that we're also putting various Chinese companies in a position to have very little competition and to be able to sort of push forward with regards to all of these things. And so they ended the article with this. They said sometime in the second half of this decade, we will know whether the U.S. government's attempt to stifle China's semiconductor industry has succeeded or failed. So this is something I'm definitely going to keep my eye on. It's
John T.,
you know what? Deal than people realize.
You know what comes to my mind when you just said the last paragraph of what you read there? I thought to myself, boy, if anything would heighten mainland China's reason to invade Taiwan, it's to get those chip factories.
But they still don't have the know-how. So.
No, but if they had the chip factories, at least they have the equipment. They could figure out how to make it work once. But I mean,
well, here we got.
Billy, they need to take the factories with the employees that run the factories.
Yeah. And the thing is, the handful of really critical engineers that set that stuff up will have jetted out of Taiwan back to the United States.
And there's another thing to look at Taiwan here, because they're experiencing dramatic population decline as well. Yeah. I read somewhere that from, I don't remember the dates, they're going from something like 16 million working age population down to 4.
Yeah.
In the next, I can't remember if it's 40 years or something like that.
Yeah, they're going to lose a lot of people because like mainland China and like the United States, by the way, we're not replacing our population. The only thing that keeps the United States afloat is the fact that we have so many immigrants that come in and help us
at all social economic levels. I mean, there's a lot of focus in the press of entry-level workers, coming over the border, but actually all socioeconomic levels would like to immigrate to the United States.
Yeah, and China doesn't have that immigration problem, really, do they? Yeah. And they probably, I don't know, if I was China and I saw my population tanking that bad, I might promote some immigration.
Well, China kind of blew it in that regard. There was so much coming out during the whole coronavirus episode. Yeah. Where all of these folks had moved to China from Africa, and as soon as there was some adversity, the very first people to see the brunt of whatever sort of nastiness could come along were the Africans.
Yeah.
I mean, they found themselves immediately ostracized from anything, locked out of their apartments and all sorts of stuff. So there was this huge migration of people who had thought, I'm going to go to China for a better life, moving back to Nairobi,
Yeah, and also we know of some people personally here at the radio station who have relatives, and those people moved to China, married Chinese people and had half Chinese children, and then, they got locked down to COVID, and the first thing they want to do is get the heck out of there.
No, you realize how, thin the amount of purported freedoms you actually have in China.
Yeah,
it's tissue paper thin.
But it's also very much still a closed society. The United States. If you come from some other part of the world or something like that, and you have whatever aspect of the rainbow skin color, we generally, I can't necessarily say that. I mean, I've heard about parts of the country that are not quite like the Bay Area. But I mean, generally, we bend over backwards to accommodate folks.
That's true. Across the country.
I mean, in a way that I don't think we always realize we do. Where China, I mean, if you are an outsider, you're an outsider, and you'll never be a citizen.
That's true.
You know?
And I mean, look at the conversation we're having now. One of our participants is an immigrant from South Africa.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's very much true. Thanks for remembering. What was I just about to say? I was just about to say something, and now I forgot what it was.
Well,
I do that to
ahead,
people.
David.
just kind of in maybe wrapping this up, this story, it is actually really fascinating to think about. Is there end of China? Is the end in sight? Like Michael brought up, Michael Olson was really fond of bringing up, the whole Sun Tzu book and the Art of War. And so much of it is about reflecting energy and faking your opponent out and having this implacable perception.
So do you think they're
of
faking?
armor.
They're trying to fake us out? Because I think seriously they're in trouble.
I think they're in trouble too. But it's interesting how they project, where they are projecting power and strength, and it makes it difficult to know exactly where they're strong and where they're weak.
Well, we know they're weak in population. We do know that.
That's part of the reason I've wanted us to look at the positive aspects of the Belt and Road. Positive meaning things that, in terms of the goals of the Belt and Road Initiative, worked. Because China is trying to build a string of pearls connection throughout all of Asia, all the way to Europe, and then integrating South America and
Latin
Africa as well. And part of the intention here, it's not all just to create debt in these other countries so that they can be forced to accommodate military bases. I think that's kind of missing their whole grand strategy here, where they're looking at this declining population. They're looking at their need to import raw materials and export finished goods. And one of the things that Peter Zeihan said in this was that if Africa grew at the rate of South Korea for several decades, it still would not have enough economic potential to absorb all of China's exported finished goods.
Right.
Yeah, that's true.
So we close in on our first hour, which we're going to take our calls in the second hour on China Watch Radio. And our question for the day is, has China already invaded the United States? And as maybe a rebuttal to that, or as an answer to that, I should say, we have a group of senators who are proposing a grand strategy commission to guide U.S. policy. And I thought, hallelujah. I mean, China has had a grand strategy against the West for decades. It was great if we can actually finally form together the right kind of high-level thinking people in the government to put this together.
Can I just point something out here?
Yeah.
We can't get our Congress to agree on basic stuff like how to spend money.
Well, I got good news here. And this actually warmed my heart a lot. So this is one of those areas where I think we're actually finding a lot of alignment between the two political parties. So a bipartisan group of 15 senators is seeking to create this commission tasked with formulating the grand strategy on China. And what's interesting is it's actually being chaired so far by Angus King, who's the independent senator from Maine. It also has John Cochrane, Tim Kaine, as chiefs on it. It's actually, so it's got a real good bipartisan, Democrat and Republican mix to it. But they really want to investigate kind of a whole government approach to Washington's relationship with Beijing. Now, King has already set up a parallel commission already, which has had some success around investing in the public sector. But let me just go on for a second here. So Senator Kaine has got these senators and their 12 co-sponsors. Most of them sit on the Armed Services Committee, which I think is probably the right center of gravity, because they would actually have all of the deep intel on China. And they'd be privy to the most sensitive intelligence on the relationship. They actually want to put the formation of this bipartisan committee into the Defense Authorization Bill coming up in October. So it would actually get mandated in a law that this bipartisan group gets assembled, and it get tasked with quickly putting together a set of positions. King said in a statement, this is Senator King, Most vitally, this commission is not putting a report on the shelf to collect dust. It'll make actionable recommendations to develop a grand strategy across the entire government. The proposed commission would mirror, this is really good news, I think, mirror the 2-year cyberspace solarium commission established in 2019, also by King, who served as one of the co-chairs in the panel. There were 80 recommendations to improve U.S. cybersecurity. The main senator said 85% of those recommendations have been fully or partially implemented.
So does this mean that it's mainly military rules, I guess, how we're going to operate?
It just happened. It's actually a whole of government approach. So it'll be around the the commerce and trade.
Through the Armed Services Committee, so that means that
it's predominantly the senators happen to predominantly sit on the Armed Services.
That's
Committee.
what I mean. That's what their primary focus is going to be, right?
No, they just have privy to a lot of the deepest intelligence.
I would hope they would delve into economics and
would. So it's a whole
business and a bunch of other things.
It's not defense focused. It's actually, and that's why they want to get it into this defense authorization bill to make this committee a holistic committee around all of the things you just mentioned, around diplomacy and economy and ecology.
You guys think any hope of it actually happening like that?
Well, it's very unusual for people to vote against the defense authorization.
That's why they're putting it in there, yeah. And it already has bipartisan, by very senior, powerful people in both parties have already signed on to this thing. And it's already had a demonstrated track record of success, this approach, with the Cyberspace Solarium Commission.
Okay.
And that got fast traction. It wasn't a 10-year study that then sat on a shelf. I mean, these guys are about as serious as a heart attack here to get something put together, because we need a strategy that actually spans administrations. We can't have all
See,
stop
that's what
and all
I'm worried
start.
about in like the South Pacific, for instance. I'm worried that when this current administration goes away and the next administration, whoever it is, comes in, the focus remains the same, because we take our eyes off certain military situations around the world for 5 minutes and we're toast.
Absolutely. Yeah, so the commission is actually modeled after former President Eisenhower's Project Solarium, which was developed as the U.S. grand strategy against the Soviet Union, to build a strategy against vis-a-vis the Soviet Union. And that proved to be very successful, because that actually established a set of operating principles and policies that was adopted administration after administration and survived all the different Congresses, all the way through to the end of the Cold War. And I thought that put us on, one voice as a country was really powerful. And you and I, we all lived through the Cold War, and, we saw this in action. But to be able to, I think this commission now is going to include lawmakers, executive branch officials, and also private sector experts.
Good. See, that's the last part of that sentence is a good one for me, because I think the private sector needs to be included.
Absolutely. And to have a whole of response, I think that had, sustainability between administrations and between, Congresses every 2 years would be just a real boon for us. Because at some point, we're just fighting this on whack-a-mole. So we have a fly swatter, and we've got an invasion of bugs, right? And we just can't take it out, on individual efforts. It needs to be a whole team approach. And I think when they're talking about here, all of government approach to it, it's exactly that. It's everybody all hands on deck with one policy and one set of policies and one set of principles.
I totally agree with that perspective. And we have all of these various think tanks and organizations. Council of Foreign Relations comes to mind, who will put together somewhat coherent policy recommendations, and then there's this kind of crazy fight to see whose policy can get adopted.
Well, the good news with this...
It'd be great if it was coming from the Senate,
John T., and that's exactly right. I think that's what helped us punch through in the Cold War as well, that, those think tanks and the K Street lobbyists and consultants, they've got a part to play for the positive. We know that there's a lot of that they play for the negative for their own vested interests.
But they have funding. They're getting funding from Raytheon. So.
Exactly. So once they have, once we have a set of policies in place for a whole government approach, then there's a framework that they can snap into and add value.
Well, I think that's part of the goal is to have it be cohesive enough.
Yes, exactly.
That they don't get bogged down by somebody trying to lobby from Raytheon or some other company.
That's right. Well, the other kind of the last piece of good news on this, I thought, it made my heart warm when I read it, is that Republicans this month established a select committee on China and they had stated if they win the House in November, the midterm elections, that they're going to play ball with this committee. That they're going to this commission. So now we would essentially wind up with both chambers of Congress along on a bipartisan basis agreeing to this approach, which
novel
would be,
approach. Yeah.
We actually work pretty good as a country if we get all hands on deck and everybody's rowing in the same direction.
Well, I hate to say it, but the certain times of our history when we did that was because we were collectively attacked.
Yes.
And we decided we better put aside our political differences and do stuff together.
Interesting, Bill, you bring that up. It's like people now have kind of realized that we are under attack. There wasn't a mushroom cloud or an explosion, but
no, but we're under attack. When I see how badly we're under attack, when you look around the world, it's really frightening. And we need to sort of pull our heads out and take a good look at what's going on and operate in a different manner.
Well, I'm excited to see what the audience thinks. So coming up on our second hour, 831-479-1080, what do you think? Has China already invaded the United States? Have they already a toehold in this country? Can we, through a whole-of-government approach with uniting us as citizens, as a population, can we push this back across the Pacific?
Or at least push it enough out of our government to where we can operate without interference.
We so often have callers, and it's often the sentiment of the show hosts that here I go throwing a grenade 2 minutes before the break, where folks will say, "Well, we just need to stop purchasing products that are made in China," and I actually think that is completely inconsequential. First of all, that we overestimate the share of China's economy that we constitute.
True.
And then the other side of that is, if we want those products to be produced here, I don't think that the way to do that is to borderline shut down our ability to run a business. I mean, if you want to set up a audio video production studio in your home, and you're going to find only products made in the United States, that's going to,
first of all, that's not even
go up by an order of magnitude.
Yeah, it's not even possible.
No, but
you're not even going to be able to run your successful business.
That's right.
So if we're going to really make that happen, we have to create an environment domestically where that can happen.
Yeah. That's right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, 831-479-1080. We'd love to hear from you, your perspective on the other side. This is China Watch Radio, KSCO.
Leave it to Jonty to drop the grenade right before the news.
I hot potatoed it over you, Billy.
You're listening to AM 1080 KSCO Santa Cruz China Watch Radio. Stick around. We've got one more hour of your calls and discussion right here.
Side of Highway 101 near the Laurel exit in Salinas. And the weather forecast for today, partly sunny, light and variable winds becoming west 6 to 11 miles per hour this afternoon. Tonight, patchy dense fog after 10 p.m., otherwise mostly cloudy with lows in the mid-50s. Northeast winds around 6 miles per hour becoming calm this evening. Patchy dense fog before 9 a.m. tomorrow morning, otherwise mostly cloudy tomorrow, then gradually becoming sunny with calm wind becoming west 5 to 9 miles per hour in the afternoon. Boaters forecast for tonight, northwest winds 10 to 15 knots, wind waves 3 to 4 feet. And tomorrow, west winds 10 to 15 knots, wind waves 2 to 3 feet, west swell around 2 feet at 13 seconds, and southwest around 2 feet at 15 seconds. The time now, 6 minutes after 3 p.m., and that means it's time for the second hour of China Watch Radio.
China Watch Radio is brought to you in part by Sushi Market Sprouts on 7th in Santa Cruz and Kaito in the Capitola Mall Food Court. Treat yourself to the finest Japanese cuisine you'll find anywhere with fresh sushi to go and delicious ramen dinners. Sushi Market Sprouts and Kaito. Yum!
Tonziman. And yes, that means you, comrades. Welcome to join the China Watch.
Did you just call me a comrade?
You're my comrade, my buddy.
Oh, okay. I thought you meant that in some
Nefarious
communistic way.
No. Well, we're all comrades in arms here in the radio, joining with our friends in the audience in the second hour of China Watch Radio. Today's question on the table: has China already invaded the United States?
Oh, comrade.
Oh, comrade. Tonziman. Tonziman, we'd like to hear from you, in your view, because you're an important part of this conversation we're having today. 831-479-1080. Join us on China Watch Radio. I'll remind the listeners to actually go to ChinaWatchRadio.com and follow along. You'll be an insider along with the rest of the team. You'll see the articles that we've curated for the week. And sign up for the newsletter. The newsletter is a no spam. You get no spam newsletter. How many of those do you get?
I don't know, because I have so much spam I have to clear it out every day.
You know, we don't send you any junk when you sign up for China Watch Radio.
Yeah, isn't that cool?
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Just the facts, ma'am.
And, something that we really love as well is hearing from our readers. So if you don't have the time or ability to call in, send an email to info@ChinaWatchRadio.com and let us know what you think about things. We get some really interesting articles from our readers on a regular basis. I always do my best to incorporate them into the newsletters. If I fail to, it's really just because I'm rushing. And so we're a community. We're not just a couple guys on the radio. You're all a part of our team.
Well, that's right. If you join ChinaWatchRadio.com, you're actually part of that insider group.
And by the way, just to, because Jonty won't do it, I will. I'll toot his horn a little bit. He puts a lot of work into that website, and he calls a lot of information, and it really does make sense when you read it.
Yeah, it does. It's an easy, quick read, which I really enjoy.
Is.
Yeah. So with that, Billy, who do we got on the line?
We have 3 phone calls. 2 of them waited through the news break, which is amazing to me. And so let's talk to Steve, who's calling us from Marina. You're on China Watch Radio.
Hang on one second. I'll be right back.
Okay.
Hello?
Hey,
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can, Steve. Go ahead.
You're on the radio.
Yeah, I'm at the municipal court right now. As I always am, the John Lennon man, always being harassed with tickets. Right now I finished a little piece on my website, LennonMurderTruth.com.
And that has to do with China how?
Yeah, the CCP interested in that?
Exactly. Yeah, I spent, it's pages 6 and 7 from the top on the chapter 2019 interview, where it says, Russia runs America. Don't think so, read this. And I go into how they have had our presidents assassinated, how they have been our presidents, how they have taken over our industries, media, courts, this, that, and the other, how when Russia dissembled, it didn't bring its spies home, they stayed there to do their dirty work, and how even Biden is in this world order crowd that they represent. And we are in deep doo-doo. Go to LennonMurderTruth.com, go to the footnotes page, go to page 6 and 7, and you'll see all about it.
Well, we'll have to make sure.
Thanks, Steve, for telling us about that. We appreciate it. All right, let's move on to Steve in Santa Cruz. Another Steve, different location. Hello, Steve. How you doing?
Yeah, great show. Billy, what's your co-host? Not John T, the other guy. What's his name?
David Welch.
We call him Nordic Dave. That's sort of his, but his full name is David Welch, and he's been part of the program now for about 6 months, a year, something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really like his style. I really like his communication style. It really comes off even tempered, believable, and backs up his facts. This subject's really, I find it fascinating because it's politically incorrect, but it's raw and it's current. And I think it affects America right now. And I want to tell you what I mean by that. I was born in 1951, and I'll be honest with you, the America that I see now is very different than the America that I lived in the 60s, 70s, and even 50s. Now, this isn't popular to say, but America was primarily, if you looked around America in the 50s and 60s and 70s even, people looked kind of the same. It was pretty white. It was probably, I think Charlie agreed with me on this. I think America was about 90% Western European back in the 60s.
I think it depends where you were located. I think that has a big part of it, but certainly that's true in many parts of America. Yes,
we did have a more monolithic culture.
Yeah, we had an established cultural identity. You know, when people thought of America, there was a stereotypical look of the American. Okay, back in those days. So that's gone now, and I'm wondering at some point whether it'll be virtually eliminated, where there just won't be, you know, that the Western European side of our culture will be a very small fragment of the country. And I'm wondering if we continue with more or less open borders, if that's going to speed the process up.
Well, you know, you bring up an interesting thought about, the absorption of people from other countries to the U.S., right? There was the idea of we were a melting pot where people came in and they had ideas and concepts and they added to the ones that were here and, you know, we could grow. But there was a component of, you know, a certain way of life and a way of doing things that people kind of comported themselves to. There was also, I think what I'm hearing from you too is a kind of a difference in decency and mutual respect, some courtesy, things that we, I think, have lost. The internet, I think, has actually probably coarsened us a bit as well. But
I think part of our national identity is the fact, at least I believe this, is the fact that we are a melting pot.
Yeah.
That the Statue of Liberty, you know, what it talks about in the inscription is kind of the way we all sort of in the back of our mind think about America, even if we're one particular ethnic group, you know?
Yeah.
Billy,
sorry, go ahead.
Billy, I want to say, you know, I want to give you an example. I was in Quebec City a few years ago, and I was there during the referendum, and they passed a number of things, and they lost some things, but they did decide that they wanted to retain French-speaking schools. All of their written material is in French. Their signage is in French.
Sure, I remember that.
Radio and television, movie theaters is all French. Now, some people would call that racist, but in some ways they were trying to preserve their heritage. They were trying to preserve their culture and their history because right next door, you can drive it in 2 hours, is Montreal, 100 miles away.
Yes.
Montreal doesn't have that, and there's almost no French identity left there because it's just been it's been diluted and distilled down. I mean,
sure.
There's been so much influx there that it's gone.
Well,
it's just it's only a melting pot.
Well, we don't have any referendums like that I know of in our country, but I do know of. Let me just take one example that I'm really pretty familiar with. Is think about the Amish, communities. They've stayed pretty much the way they've been from the entire time. They
themselves, yeah.
You know, they don't. They stand out, but they don't stand out. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And there are parts of southern Arizona, for instance, that keep a pretty prominent Hispanic culture going.
Of course, L.A. County.
Yeah. Well, and Arizona. Well, yeah. The third largest Spanish-speaking city is Los Angeles.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Behind Mexico City and Guadalajara.
But this is one of the few countries I see where if somebody emigrates to the country, they still drive around with that country's flag on the back of their car or their truck. You know,
yeah, and like I said, remember I was saying, like when I was in, say, the 5th and 6th grade or the 3rd grade, which was the tail end of the 50s or the very early 60s, when my next door neighbor, he was actually my babysitter, took care of me, but till my mom got home from work, was from Sweden. So his family was entirely from Sweden. Mm-hmm. However, they were first generation, but their dream was to be American.
Yeah,
and they looked and acted and learned and spoke flawless English. Well, and that was kind of
my relatives too, like from Scandinavia. That's why Nordic Dave. But they changed their name. They wanted to have something that sounded more quote unquote American when they came in. So at the border they switched.
Nordic Dave. That was the dream, and that for that particular wave of immigrants was to be Americans and to create and to be part of what was happening.
Yeah.
In order to have this debate about the U.S. and China, it is absolutely critical that we understand who we are as a nation. And so this conversation is very important. That said, I think we need to try and take the best of the ideals of the United States. I'm looking back at the 1960s with rose-colored glasses and saying, if only we could go back to that. I'm not sure is really articulating the message and meaning even of our founding fathers and their Enlightenment ideals. I think that the fact that a person can live here and still retain their historic identity it speaks to our strengths.
Yes.
I don't really see that necessarily as being a weakness, although with the caveat that we don't really want a situation where folks are coming here to sort of use our wealth and use our high legal standards in order to just extract what good they can from the goodwill of the people of the country. We want some sort of a balance. We want some sort of fair trade in that regard, an even split.
Sure. Well, in fact, we rented a family house to a Chinese couple several years ago, and we looked at each other. We both knew that this couple were spies. We knew, and it wasn't just because that's the way it's not some bigoted view. It was actually kind of based on what they said when we asked them questions about their work and how they got here and why they're here and what they're doing, and a lot of it was just a little bit wishy squishy, and it didn't make a lot of sense, especially the way and manner in which they wanted to meet people and get introductions.
Who's the current president? Nixon. Yeah, Nixon. Yeah, right.
Yeah. But you can't. It makes it more difficult, right, to actually differentiate. Who's here to add to us and who's here to take away.
Yeah. Right. There's also been abuse of the H-1B visa system, where Silicon Valley corporations didn't want wages rising because they wanted to extract as much money as they possibly could for their golden parachute mansion out in the Hamptons. Well, and as a result, we shipped a whole bunch of people over here, paid them as little as possible, trained them up on our high tech, and then they all went back to Gujarat province, India, and set up their own high-tech business.
Yeah, actually, I only have one correct. I agree with you. There's just one correction. Instead of H-1B, you mean modern indentured servitude.
Right.
Well, Nordic Dave, do you think we could possibly there could be a wall where we become so diverse that there's really nothing left of the original ideals, and
what of those original ideals is the most important to hold on to? I'd love to know what you think.
Well, we're going to find out. I think the point where Steve's coming from here is are we balkanizing ourselves to the point where we're all these individual bastions that aren't unified around something?
I think that to answer that question, it depends where you're coming from.
Yeah.
For instance, in my family, I'm a seventh generation native Californian.
Yeah.
So if you do the math, in my family, the first person with an Anglo last name in my family was my mother. Everybody else before that had a Hispanic last name. That's how long my family's been here. So it depends on your point of view.
Yeah.
Perhaps, but I'm not sure I agree with that. Billy, I was reading this this article that listed a whole bunch of letters back from the front lines of the Second World War, where the GIs were pushing the Nazis out of France. And I found it really astounding how these GIs had this perspective of what they were doing. They knew exactly what they were doing and why. It wasn't unclear in any way. They were rescuing these people from fascism. They were spreading democracy around the world.
Absolutely,
they had a very clear idea of what the ideals were.
Sure,
they didn't. And part of it was that they didn't care if you were Hispanic or African American or from what group you came from. They all shared these same ideals. And if we can't articulate that readily without getting into some kind of culture war, I think that we are really at that point lost. That's what I'm more scared of here. I'm not scared of people's skin color changing. That's great.
I agree with that.
I'm scared of losing those ideals.
That's a valid point.
100%. It's like, do we align on the principles that made this country great, right? Of independent of everything we've articulated in the Bill of Rights. But we should probably press on. We've got a couple
Steve,
of the calls.
Thank you for calling and bringing up the discussion. We appreciate it.
Yeah, call again, Steve.
Great show, guys. Thanks a lot.
All right, let's move on to, let's see, who's next? Well, Nick in Royal Oaks has been hanging out for quite a while. Let's take his call. Nick, what do you got? What's on your mind?
Welcome, Nick.
Well, you were opening up with the power mind and influences. I wanted to touch on the subject. I watched a Russian gymnastic team down at the boardwalk. It was time, well, they could still be defective. So as I really look at the team and think if they could be defective, I kind of noticed that people were watching over and looking at the things like defecting. So I kind of got an impression then of a power mind and activist kind of mentality, just charge or get at things. So when you talk about the Chinese, I've seen them somewhere again once, maybe at the same place, where somebody is looking over the group, and it's exactly like you said. It can be intimidating and threatening, and back to the family and all this.
So Nick, you're referring back to the Chinese having police here in the United States.
Yeah, so it goes on and on and on. Yeah. I would expect it here. I would expect it out of anybody to have a good sense of being, of watching and having everything evolving carefully. But that's not how it's going. It's all pressed. It's a nation of immigrants. It's not exactly that's a fresh look at things. It's not the correct united look at things where we've seen over decades in history of what to do and not to do and how to stand with it. And these people are being pushed out by, we're a nation of debt. We're always in debt. We have to do this. We can't do that. We can't stop and look at everything. There was a story about a Japanese man, an old person in Watsonville, and how the Spanish or whatever had the gang activity, and how he would look at it, and it would not involve any more seriously in front of him because they had more sense to they couldn't get into that trouble because there was a good look at them. And so that was appreciation of a man who was living in his town.
Yeah. I get what you're saying, Nick. We appreciate the call. Thanks for your perspective. Let's move on to downtown Al. And I would have guessed Al is in downtown.
Hey, guys. I'd like to reiterate basically what Steve was talking about in terms of, are we going to balkanize? Too much diversity is not always a good thing. We're an artificial country in terms of most countries grow out of peoples who came together with maybe a common religion, common genetics, common culture, common language, that type of thing. And it's always required maybe a dictator or something to keep all those people together because of this natural tendency to either want to dominate other groups or to, like you said, balkanize. I think about Tito in Yugoslavia, and once he was gone, how everything turned into all these different warring factions, or even Saddam Hussein, who basically was such a horrible dictator that everybody was afraid of him to step out of line. So you essentially, if you didn't get on his bad side, you were safe as a Christian or as a, any one of the other differing ethnic groups, except maybe the Kurds or something like this. And as an artificial country, we really have to reinforce what it means to be an American, and we're not doing that lately.
Al, do you think...
constantly allowing these disparate groups to undermine things on the basis of race and religion and whatever else.
Yeah, Al, don't you think, though, that the reason most of the people are emigrated or came to America in the first place is because they have a common goal?
Well,
I think that's the uniting thing.
I'm not sure
I think that common goal...
I think there's a set of goals.
Well, what I mean is they have. I think what they want to do is the common goal was to make their life better.
Yeah, but some of that has become such an economic thing. I just come here, Well,
Al, it's a good point. In fact, we had these friends of ours when I was a kid. I don't even remember their names now because I was a little kid, but they were the Cubans. They came over on the boat lift, Mariel boat lift, and they were fairly well-to-do in Cuba. And they were just fleeing Castro. and his oppression. And so they left with the shirt on their back. They had absolutely nothing. I think they had a ring or something, but they had nothing. And they actually had built up an entire chain of dry cleaning stores across Miami and Central Florida, and it had wound up being fairly well-to-do. And she was talking about how the reason why they came really wasn't economic, even though they were now poor. It was that they wanted to line around freedom. They wanted the principles of the Bill of Rights and the Constitution, and it was a political drive. And for most of my childhood, when immigrants would come here from China, because I knew a lot of people came from China over the decades, they came here because of a political ideal. Less of an economic. Now I think we see people actually coming for more economic reasons, and they would like to change, I think, the United States to suit whatever their perspective may be when they have come in. But that unification politically for us to melt in as one people, I think, is something that's probably getting a bit lost. And I think we've got adversaries and people in China who are using that to an advantage.
And, I think it needs to be reinforced because, I'm a first generation on one side and, several generations, actually on both sides. I have a grandfather from Greece and I have another father who was actually born in Germany. My grandfather came over here before World War I and then, had to go back. But it just seems to be a real problem with me that they do come here maybe for economic reasons, like all of our ancestors did. We probably were fleeing something that was just a crummy situation. But there was this reinforcement once we got here, the whole idea of Teddy Roosevelt's melting pot, that you would become an American. And some of what American is based on Western European, specifically, British, English ideas. And it seemed to be a situation that worked out okay. If you read some of the stuff by like von Humboldt, the German explorer and naturalist, when he came over and he went into the Caribbean there were always these islands that were being exchanged between the French and the English and the Dutch and the Spanish and whatever else.
Sure.
And even a lot of the populations that were Spanish, they preferred the English rule because it allowed for mercantilism. It was just more efficient and freer and whatever else. So even though, they had been under Spanish rule and maybe were ethnically Spanish, they actually preferred that British rule. And, for all of us, even though I don't have a British background, my ancestors, whether they're Greek or German, recognized that this country that was basically formed, out of, Britain and England, and a lot of their ideas, mostly Northwestern European stuff, is a situation that was better than what they had in their country, whether it was Germany or Greece or whatever at the time. And now we have these people wanting to tear that apart and saying that, this isn't a good system because it was originated by like some white men in Northwestern Europe. But that hasn't always been the case,
Yeah.
Other people who came here from Eastern Europe or Western or Southern Europe or, Italy, Russia, whatever, they recognized that this was a good situation and they bought into it and they reinforced it.
Well, that's what I was trying to say before. I was trying to say that before, the fact that one of the common things that makes America America is people wanted to come here.
Yeah.
But my thing is, I don't care who invented it. If it's a good idea, I don't care what their race was. I want to use it.
Right. Just don't contravene it.
Al,
we're up on a break, so really appreciate your call.
Okay.
Yeah, we look forward to hearing from you again. As China Watch Radio, again, go look at ChinaWatchRadio.com if you'd like to follow along as an insider. And sign up, 831-479-1080. Give us a call.
All right, Jeff and Shane, hang on. We'll get to your calls after the break.
It's the 2022 California International Air Show, October 8th and 9th. For the first time, see the Red Bull Air Force team perform at the Salinas Airport. Experience the power of the latest Air Force fighter jet, the F-35A Lightning II. And for the first time in Salinas, the world's fastest jet fire truck. And backed by demand, the Wall of Fire. It's the California International Air Show at the Salinas Airport, October 8th and 9th. Get your tickets today at SalinasAirShow.com. That's SalinasAirShow.com.
Hey guys, it's Carson. Talk radio legend Michael Savage left radio after 26 years, and Monday he makes his return as a guest on my show. He's got thoughts on Biden's brain, Ukraine, Russia, China, leftist trans madness, the election, the laptop censorship, and he's going to unleash all of it. That's Monday on your station, KSCO.
Are you thinking of selling your house and don't want to pay 5 to 6% in commissions? I'm David Bartels with Everhome Realty, and I'm like you. I don't believe in percentage-based commissions either, and that's why we offer full-service representation, great results, and 5-star service for a very low flat fee. Last year, I was ranked 14th in California homes sold, and I can sell yours for top dollar, too. To see how much you can save, go to everhomerealty.com, EVERHOME, realty.com.
Hello? Hi, Grandma. How have you been? Oh, no, Grandma, not again. Sounds to me like you got hit with ransomware, Grandma. You see, Grandma, as you're looking through that celebrity article on the internet, suddenly you receive a dialog box saying they have control of your computer and you have to pay them to get control of the computer back. Am I right? Well, only one thing to do now. Take it to Peter and his friendly staff at User Friendly Computing. Let's face it, most of your computer problems these days start with the user being tricked into clicking on a link that contains a path to computer hell. User Friendly Computing will have you back on track fast. User Friendly Computing is locally owned at 505 River Street across from Gateway Plaza. Or you can give them a call at 831-423-9653. That's 831-423-9653.
Attention KSCO listeners, this is Rosemary Chalmers, Program Director. We recently applied to the FCC, our governing body, to extend a temporary authorization to broadcast at night on 1,000 watts. This has been denied, and as such, all KSCO programs after dark and until sunrise will be heard on our sister station, AM 1340, KOMY. We apologize and will revert to normal operations on KSCO as soon as possible.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the last half hour of China Watch Radio. And this is your half hour. We'd like to hear from you. 831-479-1080. We've been talking about a whole variety of topics today, and you're welcome to go to ChinaWatchRadio.com. Exactly. It's been a fantastic hour here, last hour and a half of the program. If you haven't had a chance to watch it, or listen to it rather, then by gosh, go to ChinaWatchRadio.com and listen to the rebroadcast. I do once in a while, even though I'm on the show.
It's funny you should make that semantic mistake, because I've actually sat and watched the radio while I've listened to it. Yeah, it's bizarre.
I know the picture will come any minute.
Yeah, exactly. All right,
guys, I'd really like to mention real quick that this is show number 1 of year number 3 of China Watch Radio.
Wow.
So appreciate you all being with us over this time. It's gone through a lot of changes over the last couple of years.
Have we really been on for 3 years?
It's 2 years and 1 show as of today.
Well, okay, we're started our 3rd year. That's pretty amazing.
Somebody must like us out there. That's a rhetorical question.
It's a rhetorical question, I hope there. All right, well, that's a good way to start this segment, Jonty. Thanks. Yeah. I hadn't realized that. Shane in Melbourne, Australia, a frequent caller to the program. What do you have for us today, Shane?
Hey, Shane.
Yeah, fascinating discussion, fellas, and congratulations. July the 27th, 1953. Was a truce that was signed between the proxy war between our forces and the Chinese. And as you know, a truce means an agreement between enemies to just basically not just stop fighting for a while. And since then, the Chinese have obviously been active still in this war, and the war is now, if you see most Chinese, and I'd say probably, in Australia, everybody says g'day to each other, and that's how it used to be. But when you talk to a lot of Chinese and you say g'day, they look at you with hatred. There's no doubt, and they absolutely have got a totally different agenda, and I see that, and I'd love to hear your minds think about we've probably got a couple of battalions already in this country that are Chinese regulars, and they're just waiting for the trigger of whatever's happening with the other conflicts we've got. And I'd love to know how the military are going to deal with that, because you probably have the same problem in your country with this huge immigration problem. We've got over 1 million illegal immigrants in this country, of not just China, but I'd say other enemies of our countries.
Shane, let me ask you something. Does Australia have a plan to protect itself from foreign invasion?
Well, yeah, that's a good one, because basically, as I said, in Oxfam, with this COVID thing, which I think maybe they definitely were part of it, even though they were sort of saying it was coming from other sources, I would say that the Oxfam International report was sort of like their plan in the making, because the 47 richest people in this country doubled their profits during the pandemic. So they've worked on the capitalist system where they know that people will actually do, certain things for money, and I think the capitalism's been played off in that area where they've weakened us through that, infiltration. But I would say no, they haven't got any idea, Michael. And I'd love to know anybody, like maybe Colonel Terry or somebody who may have had more insight of how would you deal with it. They took all our weapons off us in the 80s and 90s, and that was a big one for Australians because, as you know, we were in major battles in World War I and World War II, which was significant, and our fighters were very prominent in actually helping those wars outcome. But at least you've got weapons, fellas, and they're trying to notice how they've been trying to get the weapons off you? The second defence in any country is the militias and the people who've got guns. And obviously with us, if we did have a problem with huge influx of, over the last 30 years, migration, which has been devastating in a lot of different ways. It's been good for the certain capital people who've got a lot of money, but generally for the general population it hasn't been good. And as I said before, the main one is the Chinese are definitely here, and they're not here just to be, assimilating and enjoying the environment. They're here with an agenda. You can see it in their eyes. They're enemies.
No, there's a kind of a sleeper cell component, here as well. I was sharing with another.
We should be careful, though. I mean, look, so many of my close friends are Chinese. I wouldn't want to be advocating a position that people of any certain particular persuasion are part of some clandestine army. Right. I mean, there's but at the same time, we don't want to be Pollyannish about some of the cases in which that actually is the case. And I'll share with you, Shane, that when I was in China visiting a temple, I somehow came across a Chinese general, and we sort of walked past each other. And it was the one time in my life when somebody looked at me with absolute hatred. I smiled at him like, "How you doing?" And he wanted to rip my guts out. And that was a very strange experience for me, I got to say.
Well, basically, by rights, we're still at war with them because it was a truce, and it's very interesting. There was never a peace assigned between our countries, and since then both of us have actually been saturated with certain Chinese products and a whole pile of things, and I'm very concerned about if there was a military conflict, what that means. And we'll just do the old story, fellas. We'll just fight the best way we can. But you lost 40,000 people in the Korean War, which was a fight between us and the Chinese, flexing their muscles to try to break out and take over other countries. And they're well geared up now. They've got a good military, and they've got great energies of owning countries. I know the Samoans just yesterday. The Samoan president said that he guaranteed the Australians and the other allies that he won't allow Chinese bases in his country. But I would suggest that how would he know anyway?
Yeah. Well,
how would he know?
Yeah. Well, they're very good at. China is very good at infiltration. They're very good at understanding. The inflection points of control and of information. There are a number of people that I've bumped into in Silicon Valley. It was interesting. They would have. There's one guy in particular I'm thinking of. He had a double PhD, and it was in computer science and math. And he's over here on an H-1B working for, it was $30 an hour, which is like nothing.
And he had two PhDs?
He has two PhDs. And he's living in a room with 6 other people from mainland China doing the same thing with upper degrees. And it's interesting, they engineered themselves so the systems that they were working on were all the sensitive financial systems where you get the quarterly roll-ups for the big corporates, or they were the systems that were managing a lot of the
Nobody flagged that?
No, exactly.
From any of those companies?
No. A lot of the IP, was under their control in systems, and they would float. I would see this one guy go from company to company to company with the same type of job after, setting up the centralized computer systems that ran the finances or maintained a lot of the IP. And it was always fascinating to me that you'd bring this to somebody's attention, and everyone was afraid to ask any questions because they'd sound like a racist.
That's right.
The things that have probably gone on underneath us and how we've probably had things pulled out from underneath our noses is probably greater than we probably believe.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'll let you guys go. Thanks for the talk, fellas, and always our best.
Hey, Shane, quick question before you hang up.
Yep.
Yeah, when you call in, are you dialing on a cell phone or are you using an internet phone line?
13 years working with scientists in cellular and radiation levels at behavioural science, and I lobby throughout the country for 13 years to get better information that mobile phones are totally unsafe for children's development, and that's from the top scientists I work with. So a lot of people ask me that question, and I say, well, the last time I turned on my Nokia, it says it's made in 1980, and the last time I turned it on a couple of months ago, I helped people out of psych wards who've had a bit of a rough time, and I went up to New South Wales, and I turned it on, and I got a new number, and there was 2 messages, one from the girl's family I was going up to help, and the other one was another number, and I rang it, and it was from a psychologist who'd left me a message 2 years ago. And he said, better late than never. And I thought, well, there's never been a better saying for that one.
Shane, I
all hardwired. Hardwired.
All right. Thanks for the call.
Appreciate it, Shane.
All right.
Have a good day, fellas. Bye-bye.
Right, let's move on to Jeff in Santa Cruz. Jeff, you're on KSCO's China Wants Radio.
Good afternoon. I just wanted, you guys are pointing out the racial aspect of what's going on and being careful to not profile them. Didn't we just a few months ago declare that we couldn't prosecute Chinese people because of racism on these patent issues and theft of technology?
Well, I don't recall it exactly, but it's been a thorny issue. I'll remind people of the landmark espionage case, which is with Wen-Ho Lee, the Chinese scientist at the Sandia National Laboratory who was working on the neutron bomb. And he was traveling with the classified notebook between here and China. Now, why they let him do that, I have no idea. And he was arrested for espionage, and then he sued for racism, that he was being profiled. And ultimately, they couldn't close the case, but coincidentally, a year later, the Chinese detonated their first neutron bomb, which is what the program he was working on.
So we can't go after these folks. Like 40% of the cases I heard were involving the Chinese, and now they've just declared that we can't prosecute them.
Well, our laws on treason
have changed.
Well, yeah, but they're a lot of ways are antiquated. The FBI can only capture somebody and charge them with treason, and we can only convict if they were caught in the act of actually transferring the secrets. And that's a really difficult thing to do in the information age, right?
You know, I read somewhere that our treason law actually doesn't allow you to be executed. But didn't Ethel and her husband Rosenberg, didn't they get... They were executed, weren't they?
I think technically,
for treason?
I think technically the feds still can, but they don't.
No, I think the law's been actually changed. It's life in prison now, as I understand it.
Doesn't get much of a bargaining chip. A lot of people don't realize that the Rosenbergs were only one of 2 sets of spies that were implanted by the Soviets into the Manhattan program.
Yeah.
So there's this other German gentleman named Fuchs who went undetected for many years, and he's actually the one that gave the information to China to allow the reactor to go critical so they actually could invent their first atomic bomb. A lot of people don't realize that.
That's comforting.
So, does that mean we can't prosecute?
Well, we can prosecute.
We have no
make a blanket statement. We can't prosecute is a little too broad of a statement. I think that there's a lot of nuances to it. Part of it is what is our country focused on, and how much energy is being put into anything. The FBI could or couldn't investigate a variety of different things. The Department of Justice can sit on a variety of cases and not prosecute. If you recall, in the wake of September the 11th, there was a flurry of activity going on at the federal level with regards to anti-terrorism activities. Not all of it appropriate, I might add. There was a blind eye turned to a variety of activities that were bending the law at that time to be able to go after as many people as possible.
Yep.
And so it's really, a lot of it sort of depends on our stance, our overall sort of feeling about things.
Yeah.
I'm certainly hoping that Senator King's commission to set up for a all-of-government approach and policy to China would actually address, the espionage angle of it and, operatives that are in this country and how we want to handle them. I hope so.
Yeah. Well, thanks for the call, Jeff. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff.
Thank you.
All right, let's move on to Bill in Live Oak. You're on China Watch Radio.
Welcome, Bill.
Hi, I wanted to respond to Shane. I used to go down to Australia on vacation a long time ago, and one thing they had in the paper, the Sydney Morning Herald, on Thursdays, they have a thing called the FIRB. It's the Foreign Investment Review Board. And any non-citizen that purchases property or businesses has to be reviewed and either approved or denied. And it's reported in the paper. It's open information. And I would like to see something like that in this country. They don't necessarily restrict the sale of anything inside the country, but if real estate or businesses is what they seem to concentrate on.
The transparency. Yeah,
that's something that Australia does that he did not mention. I don't know if they still do it or not. It's been a long time since I've been down there. They used to do it. I'd like to see that in this country, a Foreign Investment Review Board.
It's a bit of a challenge.
That's an interesting
his idea. Yeah. What's a bit of a challenge is that in this country we can have a legal construct of trusts, and when you have a trust in a corporation that's owned by a trust, you can actually mask who's buying the property.
Shell corporations.
Right.
Yeah, and so most of the wealthy in this country, even across the hill in Silicon Valley, are masking the property that they own.
Well,
so
a good example of that is in London right now. There's a whole bunch of Russian oligarchs who own property in Great Britain, and it's all masked by shell companies.
Yeah, you're trying to find that. Yeah.
Well, that's a big problem for the economy writ large, is that we have people who can hide money and manipulate money. And one of the things that happens very effectively is that the various strong-armed dictators of countries throughout the world are able to hide money that they're essentially paid to sell out their own people with in these various trusts and institutions, and they end up having a way out,
Yeah, I'm sure there's ways that you could game the system, but that's just a gaping hole that I think should be plugged. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, it's a good thought actually. We had a venture capitalist on the program here from Australia, a banker, a few months ago, and he was really interesting. We had a flood of Chinese billionaires, with a B, billionaires, who were buying aviation companies in the United States, and I'm a pilot, and so this was a really common discussion among us. Why are the Chinese buying up Mooney?
Exactly. Yeah.
Why are they buying up
Cessna?
Everybody. They were just buying, and most of these were money-losing businesses, by the way. Continental Engines, another one comes to mind, but they were people who had maybe 5 or 10 billion. And they would come over here and buy a company, and even if they wound up with 50 cents on the dollar because it was a losing business, they got their money out of China. So it was this race. There's a saying in China that the money's not yours unless it's in a foreign bank.
Yes, I've heard that before, yeah.
Yeah. And so I thought that, so it was a rush to that. Underneath that, though, of like just ordinary people trying to protect their wealth, is nefarious activity that's going on. And of course, the most common one that's been in the zeitgeist of common media lately has been that farm that Chinese from whatever entity bought that was in North Dakota next to that Air Force base.
Next to the Air Force base, yeah. I've heard about that.
That's a little bit, there's probably something going on there that's probably not totally above board. I'm guessing.
The one that scares...
I think a Foreign Investment Review Board would be a start. in the right direction, I believe.
Yeah.
Well,
They
thanks
do
for
it
the
in
call.
Australia.
The only caveat I'd add to that is that one of the United States' great advantages is that when there's uncertainty in the world, then people who have lots of money, they want to put it in the United States.
Yep.
So we do very well with liquidity and any sort of need to develop capital. The money's there for the U.S. in a way that it certainly isn't there for Gabon.
Plus, if we
I'm not advising stopping it. I'm suggesting we review it.
The transparency of it, which makes sense. Yeah.
It's a good idea, Bill.
Yeah.
It's a fantastic idea, and we should extend that out to where we're having concerns about it.
It's an Australian idea. That's
like
where I first
BlackRock and Vanguard owning every company as well.
There you go.
I mean, we've got some problems with the corporate governance in general, I would say.
Yeah, we do. Well, Bill, thanks for the call. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Bill.
Sure, bye.
You know, we've had some fantastic ideas from various callers in this program today. As scary as it might sound to have a government agency that, that looks at foreign investment, that's not such a bad idea.
No, I understand what the balance is.
You know what? The one that scares me is when the giant pork company was bought by the Chinese. I think it's Smithfield, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, right,
yes. I don't know about that one.
Yeah,
I kind of worry about that a little bit.
Yeah, what's in our national?
I want to know where my bacon comes from.
Exactly. What's in our national interest, and does it make sense? I mean, not.
Well, bacon's in my national interest.
Have you seen the TV commercial where they got the single women that are at a bar and they're trying to pick up a man, and one goes, "Well, let me show you." And she cracks open a bag of bacon, and the guys flock over.
We're kind of making a joke about it using the bacon company Smithfield Farms as the idea, but you could think of you could use Buick as an idea. Buick, several models of Buicks are made in China.
Well, they're buying a lot of mines and natural resources.
Right.
So where I grew up in northern Minnesota, I got a lot of relatives that work in taconite mines, iron ore mines up there, and the Chinese just bought one of the largest mines a few years ago and looking to expand. But they actually then own all those resources. They can send them back overseas.
Yeah. And is that really in the interest of the United States to allow that?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think we got to be a little careful. There's a lot of specifics there. Are they simply able to just mine things and ship it to China? I don't know if that's necessarily the case. They're still subject to the same trade restrictions that any other U.S.-based company.
Oh, indeed. But I think what I'm worried about is more like the profit margin.
Yeah.
The way the profits are handled.
Well, that's a major problem for the entire corporate structure because the profit margins are completely out of whack. The median wage of an employee went from around about 1/50th what the CEO made in 30 years ago. So now it's like 1/350th.
Yeah.
So I mean, we have a problem there. I certainly think, as I say, we really should be, as a culture, looking at the corporate structure and figuring out how we can make this work better for our actual society, for our mutual well-being.
Well, then I think this program ought to include in its focus how to fix the world. Not just China.
That's China. It's like World Watch
let's
Radio.
Work on the whole world.
Yeah, World Watch Radio. 831-479-1080. We would love to hear your point of view on China Watch Radio. And today's question has been, we've been talking about immigration, but also the main question has been, has China already invaded the United States? How do you feel about China setting up essentially shadow police departments across our major cities to enforce policies on its citizens who are residing here?
Yeah, it's kind of scary, and I think the part about invading the United States includes buying U.S. companies and manipulating our economy in a way that might not be beneficial to the United States.
Well, it really is a war of economy, isn't it?
What's that, John?
There's just so much to this. Look, if a Chinese business or entity tried to purchase a defense contractor in the U.S., they wouldn't be able to do that.
No.
There's a whole variety of levels of technology where they wouldn't be able to purchase various companies.
Right.
It's prevented. I can't remember the name of the act, but the strategic something or other. Forgive me. When a investor comes in and injects money into a U.S. company, it should be a good thing for that company domestically, and we have an awful lot of that. And I'll remind you, the foreign country that owns more of the U.S. than any other is the U.K., and that's been a very mutually sort of beneficial relationship. Investment dollars to help our businesses grow. That's the general idea. Is it better if $5 billion worth of investment comes to the U.S. or stays in mainland China? Is it better or worse for us?
And I think we need to look at the balance of what's in the overall greater good for the joint economies of the two countries, and which is in the geopolitical military advantage for one versus another. So clearly there's got to be what is the compelling interest in.
Well, yeah, I think that's actually that's sort of the main point, isn't it? Really?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, well, you brought up that the senator's trying to put together a grand strategy to have a plan out a relationship with China. And that's the level at which I think we need to address this sort of thing.
Yeah.
We don't necessarily want to sort of block Chinese money from coming to the United States, because that is ostensibly good for us, as long as it's not,
not for nefarious. Yeah, not for nefarious reasons. If it's for mutual good. We have one more call, Billy.
We do, but we've only got
Should we give him 30 seconds, see if you can do it?
Well, let's try it. That would be Dan in PG. You got about 30 seconds, Dan, right at the end of the show.
Right to the point. I'm a serious question. How many of our politicians...
Dan, your phone is dropping out. Try one more time.
How many of our politicians... Dan, your phone is dropping out. Try one more time. How many of our politicians have been purchased by China?
Yeah, the
there
elite
you go.
capture.
That's a good question.
Very good question.
Good question. I'm going to cut you loose because your phone's dropping out, but that's a very good question, and I don't think we can answer that.
And it's the scope is wide. We're going to cover that more in the show going forward in the future.
Yeah. That's it. We're out of time. Jonty, once again, thanks for all your hard work on the website and everything else. We greatly appreciate it, buddy.
Good man.
Likewise, guys. Great being with you.
All right. Thanks for sitting in for Michael Olson.
My pleasure.
In the main chair there.
Speak a little Chinese.
Flight 1080's on the way. Stick around. Warming up the airplane now. It's sputtering a little bit, though, so we'll see how it sounds later on.
Maybe they can pull the cord and get it to
get a Chinese company to invest in it.
Exactly.
This is AM 1080 KSCO, Santa Cruz, Salinas, Monterey.